The bruise on Sarah's cheek had turned purple by the time she reached the river. Her hands shook as she cupped the cold water, washing away dried blood from her split lip. Behind her, somewhere in the darkness of the Missouri woods, Thomas would be waking up. He would find the empty bed. He would find the broken lock on the cellar door. And then he would come hunting. She had lived with him for 3 years. 3 years of walking on eggshells, of measuring every word, of making herself smaller and quieter until she almost disappeared completely. The woman who had married him, full of hope and dreams, was gone. In her place stood a frightened shadow who flinched at sudden movements and apologized for breathing too loudly. Tonight had been different. Tonight, something inside her had finally broken free. When Thomas had raised his hand again, when she had seen that familiar rage burning in his eyes, a voice deep within her had whispered one simple word, "Run." So she ran. Through the back door while he stumbled drunk toward the bedroom. Through the cornfield that bordered their property. Through the woods where branches tore at her dress and roots tried to trip her feet. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs trembled, until the farmhouse disappeared behind walls of trees and darkness. Now she stood beside the river, alone in a world that suddenly felt impossibly vast. Dawn would come soon. Thomas would find her tracks in the soft earth. He had hunted deer and rabbit all his life. Finding one terrified woman would be easy. The sound of voices made her freeze. She dropped low behind a cluster of bushes, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the leaves, she saw movement on the opposite bank. Men on horseback, maybe a dozen of them, emerging from the morning mist like ghosts. They were Lakota. She recognized the distinctive way they sat their horses, the fringed leather of their clothing. Her father had warned her about Indians when she was young, filling her head with stories of violence and savagery. But watching them now, she saw only careful grace in how they moved, quiet confidence in how they surveyed the land. One man rode at the front. Even from a distance, Sarah could see he was different from the others. Older, perhaps, with streaks of gray in his long dark hair. He held himself with natural authority, the kind that needed no announcement. When he raised his hand, the entire group stopped instantly. He was looking directly at her hiding place. Sarah pressed herself flatter against the ground, hardly daring to breathe. Perhaps he had not seen her. Perhaps they would simply move on. But even as she thought this, the man was dismounting, handing his reins to another rider. He walked to the river's edge and stood there, waiting. The silence stretched out. Sarah's mind raced through impossible choices. She could run again, but her legs were already weak and these men had horses. She could stay hidden, but somehow she knew he had already spotted her. Or she could stand up and face whatever came next. Thomas would reach the river soon. He would be angry beyond reason, beyond mercy. She had seen what he did to the dog that had bitten him last summer. She knew exactly what he would do to a wife who had dared to escape. The Lakota chief across the river remained motionless, patient as stone. His dark eyes scanned the bushes where she hid, and something in his stillness told her he would wait as long as necessary. There was no anger in his posture, no threat. Only a quiet acknowledgement that he knew she was there. Sarah made her choice. On trembling legs, she stood up. Her dress was torn and muddy. Her face was bruised. Her hair hung in tangled knots around her shoulders. She must have looked like something wild and broken. The chief regarded her across the water. Then, slowly, he raised one hand in a gesture that somehow conveyed neither threat nor demand. Just an offering. Just a question hanging in the morning air between them. Behind her, from somewhere deep in the woods, came the sound of a man shouting her name. Sarah plunged into the river without thinking. The cold water shocked her system, stealing her breath, but she pushed forward. The current grabbed at her heavy skirts, trying to pull her downstream. Her feet slipped on smooth river stones. For one terrible moment, she went under completely, water filling her nose and mouth. Strong hands caught her arms. The Lakota chief had waded in to meet her, and now he was pulling her toward the opposite bank with steady strength. She wanted to thank him but could only cough up river water and gasp for air. Behind them, Thomas's voice grew louder, closer, filled with fury that made her blood turn cold. The chief lifted her onto the bank as easily as if she weighed nothing. His companions had moved their horses closer, forming a wall of muscle and leather between the river and the plains beyond. Sarah collapsed onto the grass, shaking from cold and fear and exhaustion. Thomas burst from the trees on the far side. He stopped at the water's edge, his face red with rage. "Sarah. Get back here right now. You're my wife." She curled into herself, making her body small the way she had learned to do. But the chief stepped between them, blocking Thomas's view of her entirely. He stood perfectly still, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. He did not speak. He did not need to. "That's my property," Thomas shouted across the water. "You got no right to interfere between a man and his wife." One of the younger Lakota warriors said something in their language. Several others laughed quietly. The chief silenced them with a glance, then turned his attention back to Thomas. When he finally spoke, his English was clear and precise. "This woman came to us. She is under our protection now." Thomas raised his rifle. Sarah screamed a warning, but the chief had already moved. In one fluid motion, he drew his bow and knocked an arrow, the string pulled back to his ear. Around him, his warriors did the same. Suddenly, Thomas faced not one weapon but 12. The morning fell silent except for the river's endless song. Thomas's hands shook on his rifle. His eyes darted from one warrior to another, calculating odds he clearly did not like. Sarah watched him struggle with his rage, watched him want to shoot anyway just to prove he could. Finally, he lowered the gun. "She'll come back," he said, his voice dripping with poison. "They always do. And when she does, she'll regret every second of this." "She will not come back," the chief said simply. "Go home." Thomas spat into the river. He stared at Sarah one last time with eyes that promised violence, then turned and disappeared into the trees. But Sarah knew this was not over. Thomas never let anything go. He would tell the other settlers. He would gather men who thought like him. He would come back with more guns and more anger. The chief lowered his bow and turned to her. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his hair. He had kind eyes, she realized. Sad, perhaps, but kind. "Can you ride?" he asked. Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. She had grown up on a farm before her father had died, before circumstances had forced her into Thomas's arms. Riding was one of the few skills she still possessed. One of the warriors brought a spotted mare forward. The chief helped Sarah mount, his touch gentle but impersonal. Then he swung onto his own horse, a powerful black stallion that seemed to read his thoughts. "We go now," he said. "Fast and far. Your husband will return with others." "Why?" Sarah finally managed to speak. "Why are you helping me?" The chief considered her question as he guided his horse beside hers. "I had a daughter once," he said quietly. "She also ran from a man who hurt her. She also came to the river seeking escape." He paused, his jaw tightening. "But she came too late, and her wounds were too deep. She died in my arms while I promised her she was safe." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. For the first time in 3 years, someone had chosen to protect her. Someone had seen her worth defending. "My name is Mtanaingpa," the chief said. "Two bears. You may stay with our people as long as you wish. You will be safe there." They rode west as the sun climbed higher, leaving the river and Thomas and everything Sarah had known behind. The Lakota camp appeared on the horizon like a collection of white cones scattered across the endless grass. Sarah had never seen anything so vast and open. After years of being confined to Thomas's farm, the sight of all that space made her dizzy. The sky stretched forever in every direction, unmarred by the dense Missouri forest she had known all her life. Children noticed them first. They came running, calling out excitedly. Women emerged from teepees, shading their eyes against the afternoon sun. Sarah felt their stares like physical weight. She knew what they saw, a white woman, beaten and bedraggled, riding into their home behind their chief. She had no idea what that meant to them, what dangers her presence might bring. Mtanaingpa raised his hand in greeting, and the people gathered closer. He spoke in Lakota, his words flowing with authority and warmth. Sarah caught her own name in the stream of unfamiliar sounds. She saw heads nod, saw expressions shift from curiosity to understanding to something that looked almost like sympathy. An older woman stepped forward. Her face was deeply lined, her gray hair worn in 2 long braids. She looked Sarah up and down with sharp, assessing eyes, then said something to Mtanaingpa that made him smile faintly. "This is Wiingona," he told Sarah. "She says you look like a drowned rabbit and need food, dry clothes, and sleep, in that order." Despite everything, Sarah felt a small laugh bubble up in her chest. She's probably right. Wiingona gestured for Sarah to dismount and follow her. Sarah slid from the mare on unsteady legs. The older woman took her arm with surprising gentleness, leading her toward a teepee painted with images of bears and stars. Inside, the space was dim and warm, smelling of sage and smoke. Buffalo robes covered the ground. Various pouches and bundles hung from the poles. Wiingona brought out a dress made of soft buckskin, decorated with careful beadwork. She helped Sarah remove her torn, muddy clothes without comment, though her eyes grew hard when she saw the bruises covering Sarah's body. Some were fresh, purple and tender. Others had faded to yellow and green, creating a timeline of Thomas's cruelty written on her skin. The older woman said something in Lakota, her voice fierce. Sarah did not need translation. She heard the anger, the recognition, the shared understanding that transcended language. Wiangona had known women like her before. Perhaps she had been one herself. The buckskin dress felt strange against Sarah's skin, so different from the heavy cotton she was used to. Wiangona brought food next, dried meat, berries, some kind of flatbread. Sarah ate slowly at first, then faster as her starving body remembered what hunger felt like beneath the fear. She had barely eaten in days, too terrified of making Thomas angry to do anything that might draw his attention. When the food was gone, Wiangona pointed to the buffalo robes and made a sleeping gesture. Sarah wanted to protest. It was still daylight. There must be work she should be doing, ways she should be earning her keep. But exhaustion pulled at her like a physical force. She lay down on the soft furs, meaning to rest just for a moment. She woke to darkness and voices outside the teepee. For one horrible second, she thought Thomas had found her. She sat up with a gasp, her heart racing. But the voices were speaking Lakota, calm and measured. Not angry. Not hunting. Wiangona appeared beside her, making soothing sounds. She brought water, helped Sarah drink. Outside, someone had built a fire. Its light flickered through the teepee walls, casting dancing shadows. Mtanaingpa entered, ducking through the doorway. He settled across the fire from Sarah, his movements deliberate and unthreatening. You slept through the afternoon and evening, he said. This is good. Your body needed rest. Has he come back? Sarah asked. She did not need to say Thomas's name. Not yet. But he will. Men like him always do. Mtanaingpa fed a stick to the fire. I have sent scouts to watch the eastern approaches. We will have warning before he arrives. I've brought danger to your people. You have brought yourself to safety. The danger was always there. White men have been looking for reasons to attack us for many seasons. If not you, they would find something else. Sarah pulled the buffalo robe tighter around herself. Why do you live like this? Moving, hiding, always watching for threat. Mtanaingpa smiled sadly. This land was ours long before the white man came. We moved with the buffalo, following the seasons, living in balance with all things. Now the buffalo grow fewer each year. The white men want our land for farms and towns. They say we are savages who must be civilized or destroyed. He paused, staring into the fire. We choose to remain free for as long as we can. I'm sorry, Sarah whispered. For what? For everything my people have done to yours. The chief studied her face in the firelight. You are not responsible for the actions of others. Only for your own choices. Today, you chose to live. That took courage. Sarah felt tears again, but this time she let them fall. Sarah woke before dawn to the sound of the camp stirring around her. Through the teepee wall, she heard women talking softly, children being shushed, dogs barking at something in the distance. For the first time in years, she had slept without nightmares, without jerking awake at every sound, without the constant fear of what Thomas might do if she snored or moved too much in her sleep. Wiangona brought her breakfast, more dried meat and a warm drink that tasted of herbs and honey. The older woman sat with her while she ate, speaking in Lakota and using hand gestures to communicate. Sarah gathered that she was offering to teach her useful skills, to help her find a place in the community. The kindness in her eyes made Sarah's throat tight. Outside, the camp had become a hive of activity. Women were taking down teepees, bundling poles and hides with practiced efficiency. Men were checking weapons and organizing horses. Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. They were leaving. They were moving on because of her, because Thomas would bring soldiers or settlers or whoever else would help him reclaim his property. She found Mtanaingpa near the horse herd, speaking with several warriors. When he saw her approaching, he dismissed the others and turned to face her. We're leaving because of me, Sarah said. It was not a question. We were always planning to move soon. The grass here grows thin. The buffalo have moved west. You simply give us reason to go now rather than later. You're a terrible liar. The chief's mouth quirked in what might have been amusement. Yes, we leave because of you. But also because staying would mean fighting, and fighting would mean death. Our children, our elders, our women, they would suffer most. Is it better to move and live, or stay and die for pride? Sarah had no answer for that. She watched the women working, saw how quickly and efficiently they transformed the entire camp into bundles that could be loaded onto horses and travel. These people had been forced to become experts at disappearing. "I can leave," she offered quietly. "I can go north, to another settlement. You could tell Thomas the First went that way. He would follow me instead of you." Mtanine shook his head. "He would kill you within a day. Is that what you want? To die so we might avoid moving a few days early? I don't want anyone to die because of me." "Then learn to live. Learn our ways. Make yourself useful. That is how you honor the choice we made to help you." He gestured toward Wiengona, who was directing several younger women in loading a travel. "She has offered to teach you. I suggest you accept." Sarah spent the morning learning more than she had in the past 3 years combined. Wiengona showed her how to properly fold and bundle a teepee, how to distribute weight on a travel so nothing would slip or break during travel, how to read the sky for weather signs. The work was hard, but Sarah welcomed it. For the first time since marrying Thomas, she felt useful instead of useless, capable instead of broken. The other women watched her with curiosity but not hostility. One young woman named Thinka Wieng, who spoke some English, explained that Mtanine was respected above all others. If he said Sarah was under his protection, no one would question it. But Sarah would need to prove herself worthy of that protection through her actions. By midday, the camp was packed and ready to move. The transformation was remarkable. Where there had been dozens of teepees and cooking fires and all the signs of life, now there was only flattened grass and cold fire pits. In a week, even those traces would vanish. They traveled west into the afternoon, following a route that seemed random to Sarah but clearly made sense to Mtanine and his scouts. The land grew rougher, more broken, with deep ravines and rocky outcrops that would hide their passage. Sarah rode the spotted mare, her body aching from the unfamiliar exercise but her mind clearer than it had been in years. At sunset, they stopped to make camp in a valley sheltered by hills on 3 sides. Sarah helped raise Wiengona's teepee, her hands already developing blisters but also muscle memory for the work. When the structure stood complete, she felt a surge of pride that surprised her. That night, Mtanine called a council. Sarah sat outside the circle, not quite part of the group but no longer entirely separate. She watched how decisions were made through discussion rather than decree, how even the youngest warriors could speak their minds without fear. It was so different from Thomas's household, where his word was law and questioning meant punishment. Later, as the camp settled into sleep, Thinka Wieng sat beside Sarah near the fire. "You do good work today," she said in careful English. "Fast learner. Thank you for helping me." The young woman shrugged. "Mtanine daughter, she was my friend. When she died, I swore I would help any woman who needed it, if I could. You need help. So I help." Sarah stared into the fire, thinking about the daughter Mtanine had lost, wondering what her name had been, what she had looked like. What happened to the man who hurt her? Thinka Wieng's expression hardened. He died. Not by Mtanine hand, but he died. She said nothing more, and Sarah did not ask. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm Sarah had never known existed. The Lakota moved across the land like water, never staying more than a few days in any place, always reading the signs that told them where to go next. Sarah's hands grew calloused from work. Her muscles grew strong from walking and riding. Her skin darkened from constant sun. More importantly, the fear that had lived inside her for so long began to loosen its grip. She still woke sometimes in the night, heart pounding, convinced Thomas had found her. But those moments grew less frequent as the days stretched into weeks. Wiengona taught her to cure hides, to prepare pemmican, to identify plants that could heal or feed. Thinka Wieng taught her Lakota words, laughing at her pronunciation but praising her persistence. The children, once shy, now ran to show her things they had found, interesting rocks, bird feathers, strange insects. Sarah realized with a start that she was happy. Mtanine watched her progress from a distance, offering occasional guidance but mostly letting her find her own way. Sometimes in the evening, he would sit near her fire and tell stories. He spoke of his people's history, of the great herds that once covered the plains, of the sacred connection between the land and those who lived upon it. Sarah listened and learned and felt something shifting deep inside her. One morning, scouts came riding hard into camp. Sarah saw the tension immediately in how people moved, how conversations stopped, how weapons appeared in hands. Mtanine gathered his warriors while Wiengona began organizing the women and children. Thinka Wieng found Sarah quickly. "Soldiers coming. Maybe 20 men. They look for you." Sarah felt the old fear return, cold and sharp. Thomas found me. Not just him. He brings army. Of course he did. Thomas would have told them a story about savages kidnapping his innocent wife. He would have made himself the victim and Sarah the prize to be rescued. And the soldiers would believe him because that was the story they wanted to believe. Mtanaingpa approached as the camp transformed around them. You have a choice, he said. We can hide you. Move you with the women and children to the sacred caves while we lead the soldiers away. Or you can face them. Face them how? Tell your truth. Stand before them and say you chose to leave, chose to stay with us. It may change nothing. It may change everything. Sarah looked around at the people who had become her family. At Wiengona, who had taught her to be strong again. At Thinka Wieng, who had shown her friendship without conditions. At the children who had helped her remember how to laugh. At Mtanaingpa, who had given her a reason to live when death had seemed like the only escape. I'll face them, she said. The chief studied her for a long moment, then nodded. We ride to meet them together. They intercepted the soldiers in a wide valley, open ground where no one could claim ambush. The army contingent pulled up short, surprised to see the Lakota approaching rather than fleeing. An officer rode forward under a white flag. Thomas was beside him, his face twisted with rage barely contained. Mtanaingpa raised his hand for peace. Sarah rode forward with him, her heart hammering but her spine straight. She would not cower anymore. She would not make herself small. Sarah. Thomas shouted. Thank God. These savages kidnapped you, but you're safe now. No one kidnapped me, Sarah said clearly. I ran from you, Thomas. I ran because you beat me. Because you broke my ribs and split my lip and made me afraid to breathe in my own home. I chose to go with these people. They saved my life. The officer looked between them, uncertainty crossing his face. Are you saying you want to stay with the Indians? I'm saying I will never go back to a man who treats me like property to be broken. Sarah's voice grew stronger with each word. I'm saying that these people have shown me more kindness in 3 weeks than my husband showed me in 3 years. I'm saying I choose to stay free. Thomas lurched forward, his hand reaching for his gun. But Mtanaingpa was faster. His warriors formed a wall between Thomas and Sarah, weapons ready. The soldiers raised their rifles in response. For a terrible moment, violence hung in the air like summer lightning. Stand down, the officer barked. He turned to Sarah. You understand that if you stay with them, you're choosing to live outside civilization? Outside the law? Sarah thought about all that word meant, civilization. Thomas's fists had been civilized. His right to own her had been civilized. The law that said she was his property had been civilized. Yes, she said. I understand. The officer sighed. He looked at Thomas with something like disgust. I'm not starting a war over a woman who doesn't want to be rescued. We're leaving. Thomas exploded in rage, screaming about his rights, his property, his honor. But the soldiers were already turning their horses. One last time, he stared at Sarah with eyes full of poison and promise. This isn't over, he said. Yes it is, Sarah replied. And she meant it. They watched the soldiers ride away until they became specks on the horizon. Mtanaingpa placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. You showed great courage today. I'm still afraid, she admitted. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to live despite it. He smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. Come. We have a new camp to make. And you have much more to learn. As they rode back to join the others, Sarah felt something she had not felt in years, hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope of escape, but the strong, steady hope of belonging. She had fled a monster and found a family. She had chosen to live, and in choosing, had discovered that living could mean more than just surviving. The plains stretched endlessly before them, wide and open and free. Sarah rode toward that freedom with her head held high, ready to embrace whatever came next.